Thank you for joining Once Changing the World, India's first Future Tech Meets Sustainability podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Dr. Ronjon Nag, who's a renowned inventor, entrepreneur, investor, and educator with over 40 years of experience in developing AI technologies for smartphones, neural networks, and biotechnology. He's the founder and president of R42 Group, a family office and venture group that invests primarily in biotechnology, science, and supports pre-seed stage companies in their growth journey. He's also an adjunct professor in genetics at the Stanford School of Medicine and a visiting fellow at the Stanford Center for Language and Information, where he teaches popular courses on AI, genes, ethics, longevity science, and venture capital. He's part owner of 100 plus AI and biotech startups and has sold his companies to Apple, BlackBerry, and Motorola. He's passionate about inventing, informing, and investing in the future of humanity. So, Doctor, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. So, you've been pioneering AI technologies since the 1980s. You started with the first laptop with speech recognition to neural networks to longevity science. Your journey has spanned multiple technological revolutions. How has your approach to innovation evolved over these 4 decades?
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here. Well, obviously, I was a lot younger in those days, and I was always sort of second guessing myself in those days. Isn't somebody doing something better and faster and quicker and cheaper? And now in my older days, I say, well, somebody may be, and definitely smarter than me probably, but usually these things are now interdisciplinary. I started off probably looking at things in an interdisciplinary approach very early on, because I was looking at the area of speech recognition, where speech involves many different fields: linguistics, signal processing, pattern recognition, machine learning, and man-machine interfaces, some psychology. And so you have to sort of intertwine those kinds of things. And what you need to do is be able to really try and look at things fresh and see if you can take ideas from one field and put it into another field. So in my example, I was working on speech recognition. That was my PhD. But I noticed the field of handwriting recognition, hardly anyone was working on. And I thought, well, actually, could it be an easier problem? In some aspects, it is easier. Some aspects, it's harder. Now, often when you're writing a word, you cross the T at the end of the word, not while you're going along. In speech, it's perfectly linear in time. And so what we're trying to do is really what's quite common is take notice that you can take an algorithm or a technique. And that's what I noticed. If you take some of these speech recognition algorithms and apply them to the handwriting problem. And then later on, you found that many of these techniques were applied to biology and gene sequencing to actually predict what the next gene would be and predict the sequence of a gene.
So you've been part of many inventions in mobile tech, which have been the first of its kind, right from holographic phone calls, touch screen phones. What, according to you, is the future of mobile? Because I've been invested in augmented reality, virtual reality industry since 2015. And I've seen this transition of, where we are kind of like breaking away from the 2D interface and getting into the 3D world, and I believe that we would possibly, because I think mobile itself is maybe losing its utility because we've done like these foldable phones and so on and so forth, but it's not moving ahead, wherein these head wearable devices, these AR, VR, MR glasses, where what will do is possibly it'll give you a complete window into the world, where you'll go from possibly carrying technology to wearing technology. So somebody who's pioneered mobile tech, what's your thoughts on the future of mobile tech?
Well, mobile is not going to go away. It's how we use mobile will be different. And there's going to be inflection points. So far, people are not very comfortable wearing the glasses. And you need sort of an inflection point where the glasses are really almost either invisible or fashionable to actually wear, and also not distracting. People haven't quite got that intersection of all those techniques working quite right yet. And the analogy here is, for many years, there were smartphones before the iPhone, for many years, actually. I sort of built my first smartphone in 1998, 1999, with a phone which had full screen browser, games, apps, speech recognition, handwriting recognition, and we sold millions of them in China. And That was a flip phone with touch screen as well, but it didn't get sold in the West because of my thought was, well, in the West we like buttons, keyboards. Look at BlackBerry. BlackBerry's eating our lunch. And BlackBerry finally went into sort of touch screens. They bought my second company. And finally the iPhone came, which came sort of as a follower to all these other companies that had done implementations of smartphones where they actually had the exact right performing technologies put together nicely. Whereas before, companies had the technologies, but some of the component technologies weren't quite ready yet. And so that, in a way, I view the pioneers were the people before Apple who were sort of trying things out, making things work. And what we need, maybe it will be Apple, maybe it'll be somebody else, is to actually take all the technologies once they're ready to actually be integrated into a particular form. It may be glasses, spectacles. It may be, we're already wearing these fitness wearables and rings, and I think there might be something in your teeth. It might be something it might be an earpiece. It might be something in your shoes. But we're not, or maybe it's all of the above. It may be in your baseball cap. It may be intertwined into your hair. It may be in your shirt. And so we don't know what those are yet. Clearly, one thing is we want to be able to look at screens easily. We want to look at text easily. Now, is that a holographic projection in front of you, or is that something in the glasses that you can see a bit closer to? Is something you switch on and off? So all of those things, we don't know what we don't know. We have to try them. And a number of companies, labs, universities are trying all these techniques just to see what might work and what might not work. Really, you don't know what you don't know. You just have to try them and see which intersection. And the next segment is, are there industry segments that are must-have? Industry segments that are must-have. So it's where you can only do it if they're in your spectacles. So often these I think I forget the name of the company, but there's a company that sells to industrial maintenance people where they've got their hands already occupied and they can't, really, they've got to hold on to a pole or something like that. They're climbing a pole. So they need the things displayed in a different way. So he starts off with the must-have segments and then move to mainstream segments where people need it for other things as well.
Right.
Often a technique is people with disabilities. There is the American Disabilities Act, which says that products need to work for people with disabilities. When I was at Motorola, we looked at that and actually said, well, actually, instead of resisting those laws, we should embrace them. Because it turns out things that people with disabilities want, able-bodied people want them too. You can think about, how do you make a phone for someone who is deaf? That was the task that was given to us. Make a phone for someone who's deaf. Well, that's how texting came about, right? And you have also dispatch and speech recognition, those kinds of things, handwriting recognition to turn voice and text into computer text so other people who are deaf could actually communicate.
The future of tech is looking superbly interesting with this convergence of tech, with AI meets XR, with IoTs, wearable computing, brain-computer interfaces, and also with these mobiles. What's happening is that we're getting this text neck syndrome, So hopefully maybe the narrative would be like, get away from that, with these wearable devices, look up. So yes, I think the future of mobile tech is looking very, very interesting. You are the Adjunct Professor in Genetics at the Stanford School of Medicine. It will be great if you could explain biotech and genetic editing methods such as CRISPR-Cas9 as well as synthetic biology. And how do you see that impacting?
Let's try something else. The body is extremely complex, and that's one of the problems of explaining biology. There are some mechanisms that we understand. We know about hormones and we know about cellular replication. What's amazing is we have DNA, which is a molecule which is in every single cell that we have, whether it's a stomach cell, skin cell, an eye cell, the same DNA is in every cell, doesn't matter what type of cell it is. And what happens is there's something called gene expression. Depending on how the DNA expresses itself, tells the cell what to do. So it creates RNA, and then RNA creates proteins, and then proteins tell our cells what to do, what the functions of the cell. And so that's known as the central dogma theory. There are now ideas that maybe that DNA can go straight to proteins, but the DNA tells our body what to do. So what's gene editing? Gene editing is where parts of the gene can be edited out. So certain genes say we've got blue eyes or brown eyes, or other genes say we're protective against cancer, or we are less protective to certain diseases. For example, the BRCA gene says that you have a 40% chance of breast cancer. The APOE4 gene is for Alzheimer's. Most diseases, by the way, are a long tail of genes, not just one gene. So gene editing allows us to change a gene and exert a gene that maybe give us predisposition to a particular kind of disease. And it's a predisposition to a particular kind of disease. And probably the issue right now, though, is typically gene editing systems can only edit one gene at a time. And the problem is two problems. One is you're not sure what other unforeseen occurrences could occur by editing that gene. The second issue is a lot of diseases are not one gene. There are many, many genes. And really, most of the diseases that have been solved, sickle cell anemia, for example, is the main one that's been solved out there. It's just one gene. But if you've got lots of genes or genes spread across the genome, it's very difficult to do what they call long-range gene editing. So there's a second generation of gene editing companies and labs that are trying to do that.
Right. Interesting times. 0.4 billion base pairs of DNA. I mean, it's just extremely complex. But, with bioinformatics and AI, we're understanding more and more about our human biology. Now, with AgeBica, you are championing the first AI-developed vaccine for aging, targeting senescent cells. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So I'm the co-founder of Agemica. When our target is a moonshot target, the idea is to come up with a vaccine for aging, and the vaccine for aging is an idea. What does that mean? Does that just stop you aging? Does it reverse you aging? And so how would you do it? So the main thing is set a moonshot to think about. If you don't even ask the question, a big enough question, you're not looking at a big enough answer. So the question is then, how would we do it? So the way we're looking at it is aging is a number of diseases. Number of age-related diseases. The number one killer is cardiovascular disease. The number two killer is cancer. Then we have neurodegenerative disease. And if we can solve those, then you solve lots of big chunk of the aging problem. And so we're starting off with the first cluster of diseases, which is we're looking at cancer, which cancer by itself is many, many, many cancers. It's not really one disease. It's many different kinds of, when you look at a tumor, you can do a genetic analysis and find out what particular gene expressions is causing that tumor. And fundamentally, coming in as an engineer, most biotech looks at one cancer at a time. What we want to do is look at lots of cancers at a time, which fundamentally I think is a better idea because often, as you know, cancer metastasizes into other parts of the body. And so if you've solved one cancer, that's great, but it's like whack-a-mole. You might appear somewhere else. So the idea here is, can we find and attack a cluster of diseases all at the same time and get as many as possible, find as many gene expressions that affect as many diseases as possible and find those using computational means. And then the second idea is not invent a new drug. Try and find existing drugs that have, in new combinations, can actually attack those cancer activity. And the third idea, that's the therapeutic. The second idea makes it a cancer therapy. But then how do you make it a vaccine? And so how can we do, again, computationally create a peptide delivery system that targets the cells so it's actually protective against and has what's called surveillance against cancer showing up in the body. And so looking at cancer, then we start all over again, the same process for cardiovascular disease, and then start all over again for neurodegenerative disease. And that's what we're trying to do at Agemica.
So doctor, you mentioned, this research is for cancer, but would you be able to explain how does it play a role with this vaccine thing for and
How would we do it? How would we do it?
help
So,
over
as I
there?
said, aging is a complex problem and it's multiple diseases attack us at one time. So the idea is to look at clusters of diseases. One cluster is cancer, another cluster is cardiovascular diseases, another cluster is neurodegenerative disease. Now, a lot of them are correlated, right? So you start to solve big chunks of one of those, then it seems to solve chunks of some of the other diseases as well. But we have to go through step by step. So it might be outlandish to say we are creating a vaccine for aging. It's not outlandish if I tell you how we're going to do it. And we're going to do it step by step. And the first step is look at cancer.
Right. Yeah, so I think aging is such a big problem. I think if we are able to either stop, pause, or reverse aging, I think the entire world will change. Doctor, treatment therapy that you're talking about, where you're integrating AI in cancer therapy, the write-up says that your team has tested some 7 drug combination across 30 tumor organoid models. So can you explain the role of AI as well as these 3D brain tumor organoids in predicting the effectiveness and modeling to provide better insights compared to these traditional testing methods?
Yeah, so traditionally people test on mice. Unfortunately, I'm not a mouse. You're not a mouse. There's very big differences between us and mice. We're many, many times bigger. Our brain's many times bigger. And then people then do what's called in vitro testing in a test tube on a Petri dish. And there's now a newer kind of approach, testing on organoids, where you test it on human cells itself. And so that's what we have done, is tested human cells from different kinds of tumors, actual human cells. The next step is to create a cancer-proof mouse, but a mouse not with its immune system, but with a human immune system. You can get what's called a humanized mouse, which the immune system of the mouse has been replaced with the immune system of a human. And so it's going to be a little bit more accurate, more information of whether your treatment will actually work on a real human before you go to a human. There's also certainly other approaches. One thing we're doing is sort of using existing drugs. So by definition, we know the drugs are safe by themselves. They still need to do some level of testing because in combination, they may not be. So you have to still ensure that the combination is safe. And so using these techniques from an engineering sense, from a mathematical sense, you asked me what's the computational technique, but you have to sort of look at every single possible combination of drugs, how they work. There are now these toxicity databases as well, what combinations are toxic, and then which gene expressions they actually affect. So if you can do that computationally, you can actually come up with a result. And that's what's known as in silico.
Doctor, your approach for this vaccine for aging with targeting the senescent cells, do you see that there could be any side effects? Because senescent cells itself is also plays a big role in the body, So do you see that there could be some side effects with when you're targeting these senescent cells?
Right. So senescent cells means old cells. So as cells get older, sometimes they get into a state of senescence where they start to secrete things that they don't normally secrete. There's an theory that we actually need some of those cells to become old and blow up to stop cancer, for example, instead of regrowing and keeping growing. Usually there've been many, many examples and experiments where you destroy the senescent cells and the mouse gets shinier coat, can live longer, and gets stronger and has more endurance. So I think what we're looking at, there's a balance that's called homeostasis, where you have to actually have sufficient killing of senescent cells, but maybe not all of them. And I think that's part of what the experimentation has to be about, to see at what level too much of anything usually is not good for you.
Doctor, so with these tools that we have right now to genetically modify these mouse, making it more humanized, or these organoids, where you create these brain organoids or any organoids to your pluripotent stem cells, how are these tools enabling these research of yours?
Yeah, I think the new tools are popping up all the time, right? So almost every day. These are new databases, new organoids of various kinds. Sometimes they're made available by labs around the world, sometimes by commercial organizers. And that's probably the inflection point. Okay, so you might read about something by a lab, but can you use it yourself? Can you get hold of it? And it's not really until it gets to sort of the commercial availability of cell lines and organoids to other labs around the world where you get an inflection point, an acceleration of science. There's another company I'm involved in, I'm co-founder of, and that is SuperBio, superbio.ai. And that is going to be basically got about 1,000 AI models, all with the same interface. So you can just upload data, move sliders along, and then click train. And the idea there accelerates science by a factor of 20. Eventually you'll have the AI scientist that actually you won't have someone like me or my co-founders. You'll have a machine thinking of the theories and actually testing the theories themselves. That's what's going to happen in the next probably less than 5 years, I would say.
How cool is that? And you're almost democratizing AI with biotech via these tools such as SuperBio. You're also the founder of R42. Is R42 open to investing in Indian biotech and AI startups?
So R42 is a venture firm and an institute. So we work with people all over the world. Our investments typically are in the US and UK. So we'd certainly look at Indian startups. We've got one or two Indian investments, but typically they have a US or UK presence as well. And we have other companies like Ixana, which I'm the co-founder of, which is trying to solve age-related macular degeneration, particularly the dry form, which is really there's no cure for. And there we're working with Indian labs there. So we usually work with Indian labs, but usually invest in a US entity that works with the Indian part.
Right. You're part of or either invested in 100 odd or plus AI biotech companies. Is there any ones among them which like really excites you the most in terms of the potential on the impact on humanity?
Yes, 3. So Agemica, certainly, which is a vaccine on aging. SuperBio.ai, which is trying to democratize science and accelerate science. And then finally, Ixana, which is trying to cure dry AMD around the world. So those are big, high-impact implementations around the world.
Right. Amongst the portfolio companies, which one is the most ready for like clinical trials or going to the market?
Certainly, the drug discovery process is in 3 phases. Phase 1, which is just testing safety. Phase 2, which is trying to test efficacy. And phase 3, which is trying to test if it actually works for a wide range of people. Typically, so phase 1, 2, and 3, what's called being in the clinic, where it's actually being used on real humans. Preclinical means it's not at that stage. It's being tested either in silico on a computer or on a Petri dish or a mouse before we subject it to humans. So we have certainly Agemica and Ixana are starting to go into phase 1. We have another investment called Helex, which is trying to solve rare diseases, and particularly trying to solve neurofibromatosis, and that's entering phase 2. And typically phase 2 is a very interesting time where we're trying to see not just is it safe, but does it work? And so we're looking forward to see those results.
Right. Can you talk about any of your upcoming projects?
Upcoming projects. Well, right now I'm looking for databases of human data, of human health records. So these are now starting to pop up all over the world, and they're starting to have a process where they can be anonymized, so experimenters can use them. They can be either anonymized or synthesized. So when I say synthesized, it's so difficult to get human data. Topic in AI called generative AI, Gen AI, which I'm sure most people have heard of, but they've heard of it in a consumer context. They've heard about it in creating videos and fake news and pictures and fake pictures of celebrities and things like that. But there is a medical approach of it, which is where can you actually generate medical data instead of collecting it from real humans? And the critique of it, well, in the early days, it hasn't been very good. It hasn't been quite there. But just like in the consumer, now you're getting consumer pictures and videos that look so lifelike, so believable. My prediction is that we'll be able to see generative AI hitting medical data as well at the same time in a level that where you may not need to collect data from humans anymore. You may be able to get enough, extrapolate data from the data that we already have.
How cool. The future looks really exciting as well as scary. Would you want to share any advice to young entrepreneurs or researchers getting into the field of AI and biotech?
Well, it depends on your time scale, right? So there's a field called quantum computing, which I think is 20 years away. But if you're actually a young entrepreneur, a young scientist, that's okay. You've got to go where the puck's going to be, not where it is now. There's a temptation or to actually work on the latest things that actually work on that work today. There is a temptation to do what everyone else is doing. And so my advice would be not do that. Do something that no one else is doing. Back in my day, 40 years ago, everyone else was working on speech recognition. I worked on handwriting recognition. Take your skill that you've learned in one field and apply it to a different field, and be open-minded, be skeptical of everything you hear, including anything you hear from me. Don't check your brain in at the door. Does what you hear make sense? You might say a vaccine for aging. That doesn't make any sense. How would you possibly do that? I used to get that reaction in 1983 when we'd say, well, I'm working on a system that could understand speech from a machine that can understand human speech. Wait, how can you do that? How's that possible? Then you have to go through the same approach. You break the problem into mini problems. Now, the advantage we have today is you don't have to use your own brain as much. You can actually use machinery to do it for you and help you think through what the steps are.
I think that's such a cool advice, because I think 90% of the population goes where everybody is going.
Yes.
And when you break out, that's where you get to know more. So there was this quote where while the world zig, you zag, and I think you've been doing that, and that's the reason it shows in all of your works. With this convergence of biotech and AI and this vaccine for aging that you're talking about, when do you think these interventions would be available for the general people?
When? That's the acid test. Normally it takes 15 years. So let's start with that as a data point. It takes 15 years on average for a drug. How can we make it faster than that? Again, with the new tools we have, will that become faster? Maybe we can get faster than that. If you can do it at all, by the way, most things fail. 95% of things fail. So you've got a problem. It takes 15 years and 95% chance you'll fail. So how do you not fail, and how do you make it quicker? Well, I think I'm optimistic with the computational approaches that we have, and also some of the biological approaches, having organoids to say, well, okay, if it's not working, let's not go forward. Let's try something else. There is another thing in biology, biotech. Often people know it's not working, they still go forward. And it's sort of a denial thing. It's sort of scientific denial. And where people know at the beginning where it might not work later on, but they still continue with the process. Maybe to see, well, what else, maybe it will work, because there's something called false positives, false negatives. So usually if it doesn't work in a mouse, people don't go forward. I'd like to turn that upside down. Wait a minute. What if it didn't work in a mouse, but does work in a human? That's a possibility, right? So all those experiments that failed in mice, I know that, when you look at the biology, then people realize, okay, well, this is why it failed. But there may be many of those things that maybe they would have worked in humans after all.
You have successfully sold companies to Apple, BlackBerry, and Motorola. What key lessons about timing and positioning have you learned from these exits?
Well, you have to go where the puck's going to be, because otherwise all those companies have been invented it themselves. Second, you have to be unique. You have to be unique in what you're doing. Otherwise, there's plenty of people to pick from. Third, you have to have extremely high talent. And if you have good talent, you can actually move forward. So that's what we want to try. And I think those are my 3 recommendations.
Right. Doctor, my last question to you. What's the moonshot that you're going after? And would you be able to paint a picture of the world in the next 10 years? Because you said in the next 5 years, possibly you'll be able to bring these interventions and maybe the world is going to change with these AI converging with biotech. What's your intuit, what the world is going to look like in the next 10 years with these vaccine for aging and drug discovery happening and so on and so forth? Paint a picture with your moonshot, paint a picture of what the world is going to look like in the next 10 years, specifically in the space of healthcare.
Right. So the moonshot, I'm going after is aging. Now, there are many big problems in healthcare, Alzheimer's, for example, and a lot of neurodegenerative diseases are very difficult to solve. If we can actually solve those, computationally solves the cheap bit in the, you can argue the easy bit and say, okay, here's our idea. You still have to do the trials, right? You still have to do the trials of people. And so I think what I'm looking for are there new ways for doing trials? Are there different ways, something called adaptive trials, where you're trying things all at the same time and you drop the loser, the thing that isn't working, you drop. I think there's a lot of innovation to be done on the trials because that's actually the long bit and the expensive bit. So if we can actually fix the trials problem, then that will accelerate. And again, most of the focus in computational is on that candidate selection. Well, that's the cheap bit and the easy bit. I think we need other tricks. Now, I've got one trick, or maybe a couple of tricks, which is reuse existing drugs, so-called drug repurposing. But I think there's some other tricks as well to do it, being clever in sample size and mathematically choosing the right people for the right condition. And the world in 10 years is going to be scary and exciting. There's lots of things that can be pretty scary in terms of cybersecurity and being able to target things that we don't want to be targeted. For many, many years, people used to say, we're going to be afraid because it could be a regular high school student in their lab could release a pathogen and destroy the whole world. Well, that hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. But we're getting to the stage where the tools available to the ordinary person are going to be so fantastic and so powerful. You're going to have some guardrails against misuse.
Yeah, Doctor. Thank you for ending on that profound note. I think we're sitting at a fantastic point of time. Just last week, we saw the power of open source, where a Chinese model, DeepSeek V3, with the DeepSeek R1 reasoning model, has performed better than or at par to the world's leading models such as ChatGPT-4. So yes, I think we're sitting in a fantastic point of time. And then, like you said, people such as yourself are finding these new ways to accelerate these drug discovery methods and possibly trials and bringing it a little bit more closer. That's so awesome. But the other side of it is that, we are also made this tool almost open and accessible for everyone to kind of, tinker around with. And what that could bring is something I don't think people are having a conversation about. Yes, I think we're getting into a fantastic world because with these tech stack converging, with AI converging with biotech and possibly these quantum computing, which might come in possibly 15, 20 years. But even these tech stack, they're so powerful. They're self-learning and they are already showing us these early utility or use cases for possibly, these vaccine for aging and so on and so forth. So yes, I think we are entering a fantastic point of time, but yes, a scary point of time. Tech inherently is never bad. I think it's we humans, because we live in a world where we always go for maximizing profit at any cost. And that leads to things which is quite bad. So, but I hope that we go into a world which is more decentralized, more democratized, and more equitable. Thank you. Sorry, you saying
Thank
something?
you. No, thank you very much for having me. I agree completely. It's going to be scary and exciting. And thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking time and being part of the podcast. And for my listeners, if you like what you see and hear, then please press the subscribe button. And until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate this.